Okay, so let's dive in. Today, we're looking at something that, well, it really touches all of us, often without us even noticing.
Absolutely. The quiet workhorse.
Federal civil servants, the vital work they do, which is, so often overlooked.
Right, the people behind the scenes.
Exactly. And we've got this great collection of sources, stories from Michael Lewis, other writers too, that really pull back the curtain.
And they show the impact these individuals have. It's quite compelling.
Yeah, surprising facts, profound impact. Our whole goal here is to give you the shortcut, basically, to being really well informed about the who behind the what in government.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how the public idea, that sort of bureaucrat stereotype,
Mm-hmm.
clashes so much with the reality described in these stories. We're talking
Yeah.
about dedicated people, really innovative people, solving huge problems that affect millions.
Often completely out of the spotlight.
Exactly, far from the
Ah,
public eye.
yeah.
So we'll introduce you to some really remarkable characters, people protecting miners, searching for aliens,
Mhm.
and we'll dig into why these stories, well, why they just don't get told very often.
So let's start with why it's even hard to recognize these folks. There's this group, the Partnership for Public Service, and back in 2002, they started these awards, the Sammys.
Right, to spotlight the good stuff.
Exactly. Because historically, if a civil servant messed up, you heard about it, maybe Congress got involved.
Oh yeah, public failures.
But the successes, the breakthroughs, crickets.
Which naturally doesn't exactly encourage taking risks or innovating.
No, it encourages keeping your head down. So our first unsung hero, Christopher Mark, he was a coal miner, then got a Princeton education, became an expert.
Quite a path.
Yeah, really surprising. His dad was this famous Princeton engineer, tested cathedrals, believe it or not.
Gothic cathedrals.
Okay. But Chris kind of rebelled, went into factory work, then coal mining. He wanted to really get the American worker.
Hands-on experience.
Totally. But being down there in the West Virginia mines, seeing the danger constantly, and then his mother tragically died by suicide,
Yeah.
it shifted him.
Understandably.
Moved him away from abstract politics towards something very concrete. Worker safety. A technical problem to solve.
And that experience really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? What happens when safety is just seen as a cost of doing business?
Exactly. And back then, half of all coal mining deaths were from roof collapses.
And the industry attitude was often that safety was, well, for wimps, chilling.
So Mark's PhD work, that was his solution. Pillar design for longwall mining.
Longwall mining,
Yeah.
where they shear off the coal seam.
Yeah, and leave these pillars to hold up the roof. But how strong do they need to be? The Wilburg mine disaster in '84, where 27 miners died, really drove home the need for a scientific answer.
A terrible catalyst.
So he developed the stability factor. Real math, real engineering, replacing trial and error.
Bringing rigor to it.
And what's really wild is later he found a link between horizontal stress in the mines, a big cause of collapses, and plate tectonics.
Plate tectonics.
Seriously. Which allowed for even more precise safety calculations.
Yeah.
And he didn't just publish it. He went out to the coal fields himself, delivered the knowledge, the software, directly to the miners and engineers. His view was, if you don't transfer the tech, you're just wasting taxpayer money.
That's dedication. Taking it the last mile. This connects to that whole roof bolt story. It's the perfect example of tech versus regulation.
The roof bolts, remind me.
Well, this new tech comes along, roof bolts, designed to make mines safer. But initially, fatalities actually went up
Wait, increased? How does that happen?
because companies figured out the absolute minimum number of bolts they could install just to keep the risk level the same as before, but save money.
Oh, wow. That's cynical.
It is. Death rates only really started dropping sharply after 1969.
What happened then?
The Bureau of Mines got enforcement power. Regulation. It shows how the market, left alone, sometimes fails. Right. Even with the tools available. You need that push, often from public servants with the power to enforce.
And the tragic flip side was the Crandall Canyon disaster in 2007.
Oh, I remember that. Awful.
9 people died. And the reason? The company had ignored Mark's formula.
Unbelievable. Directly ignore the science.
No, but that catastrophe, terrible as it was, finally led to Mark's office getting the authority to inspect all deep mine designs.
So a change finally came from it.
A huge change. By 2016, first time ever, not a single American miner was killed by a falling roof.
That's incredible. Zero.
And Mark himself says it's 50-50. Better tech, like his work, and the culture change driven by federal rules.
Both working together.
He even debated an economic historian about it, defending the role of regulators. In a journal his own father used to edit, no less.
Wow. Talk about standing by your work.
Okay, so from deep underground, let's go way, way up to space. Because here's something really mind-bending. Experts think in the next 25 years, we're probably going to find evidence of life on another planet.
That's a profound prediction.
It is. And leading the charge is NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL.
Ah, Disneyland for nerds.
Right, exactly. And what's key here is this is taxpayer money. There's, no money in it for billionaires.
Right. This isn't about profit, it's fundamental science.
Yeah, trying to figure out how the universe was made, whether we're alone, and JPL's track record is just stunning.
Explorer 1, Pioneer.
Right. First U.S. satellite, first probe to leave Earth orbit, key parts of Hubble, James Webb.
And Voyager 1 still phoning home from 15 billion miles out.
Incredible.
And what really comes through from the sources is the optimism at JPL. These scientists, they're from all over. France, Ukraine, China, Australia.
A real global effort.
Totally. And they're so confident. It's not if they find evidence of life, it's when.
So let's talk about Vanessa Bailey. She did something incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Directly imaged an exoplanet.
Directly saw it. That's rare.
Extremely. HD 10696b, only about 82 planets have been directly imaged like that to date.
Wow.
But she's so humble about it. It says it was just fresh eyes, credits her team, the people who came before. It really speaks to JPL's culture.
Teamwork over individual genius. And the big challenge, technically, is finding planets in that Goldilocks zone. Right?
Exactly. Not too hot, not too cold. The problem is, those planets are close to their star.
So the star's light just completely washes them out.
Like trying to see a firefly next to a searchlight. Which brings us to the coronagraph.
What?
Coronagraph. It's a device for starlight suppression. Basically blocking the star's light so you can see the faint planet next to it.
Okay, makes sense.
The tech's actually been around since the 1930s, and Nancy Grace Roman people call her the mother of Hubble. She suggested using one way back in 1959.
Ahead of her time.
Yeah.
And Nancy Grace Roman, her story is amazing too. Just quiet persistence.
Yeah.
People tried to discourage her from astronomy back in high school, even college.
Of course.
But she pushed through, became NASA's first chief of astronomy in '59, led the charge for space telescopes, which eventually gave us Hubble. Absolutely. And she made tough calls too, like killing a project for a telescope on the moon to focus resources. It shows that long-term thinking that, well, frugality even, in these agencies.
Managing taxpayer money responsibly. Then there's Nick Siegler. He's JPL's chief tech guy for the exoplanet program. Calls NASA the inspiration business.
I like that.
He was a chemical engineer, went back to school at 32 for astronomy, joined NASA at 43.
Never too late.
And he's championing this other idea, an alternative to the coronagraph. The starshade. Get this. It's this huge gold flower-shaped thing, unfurls in space, bigger than a football field.
Whoa.
And it flies tens of thousands of kilometers away from the telescope, perfectly lines up, and blocks the starlight, like an external precision lampshade for a star.
That sounds incredibly complex, but amazing if it works.
Right, so the coronagraph is going up on the new Roman telescope soon, but the starshade, it might get picked for the next big mission in the 2030s, the Habitable Worlds Observatory.
So NASA's betting on multiple horses, taking calculated risks.
Exactly, for potentially groundbreaking discoveries.
Which brings us back to the big question. What does it mean if we find life out there?
Vanessa Bailey's take is interesting. She talks about existential humility.
Existential humility.
Yeah.
She thinks finding life elsewhere would be incredibly inspiring, give us hope, make us feel part of something bigger.
And maybe take some pressure off humanity. Like, maybe we don't have to get everything perfect because,
You're not so special.
Right. It's a humbling but maybe liberating thought. So how does all this big picture stuff, connect back to our everyday lives? Let's talk government data, statistics. What does it actually mean to count something?
Right, because the government produces this Niagara of data, as the source puts it. Everything from wages to weather, exports. It's fundamental. It's even in the Constitution with the census.
Built right in.
But the key thing to grasp, and this is crucial, is that stats aren't just found. They're made.
Made. How so?
Well, they require choices, definitions, context. Think about those WWII planes.
Ah, the bullet holes example.
Exactly. They wanted to reinforce the planes, so they looked at where the returning planes had bullet holes. Yeah. But the statistician Abraham Wald said, no, reinforce the places where there aren't holes.
Because the planes hit in those spots the engines, the cockpit never made it back.
Precisely. The data you don't have is crucial. Or child pedestrian deaths. The numbers went way down. Miracle.
Yeah.
Right.
Sounds good.
Except it happened because roads got so dangerous, parents just stopped letting kids play outside near them. The statistic hid the real story.
Okay, here's a really weird one that makes the point perfectly. Deaths from falls among seniors.
Okay.
They've almost tripled since 1999. Tripled. More seniors now die from falls than car accidents.
Whoa. Are people falling more? Or are falls more dangerous?
Neither, really. It's mostly because they changed how they record the deaths in 1999.
Change the recording.
Yeah, they started doing a better job counting deaths that happen weeks or even months after the initial fall, linking it back.
Ah, so the underlying reality might not have changed that much, but how we measure it did.
Exactly, which completely changes the story the number tells. It raises that big question. How are these numbers actually constructed? So let's unpack one of the biggest, most impactful numbers out there. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI.
Ah, the CPI.
Yeah.
Everyone hears about it,
Yeah.
but few probably grasp its complexity.
Right. It determines Social Security checks, food stamp eligibility, pensions, tons of salary adjustments.
It had a massive direct impact on people's wallets, daily lives. And
Mhm.
calculating it is, well, it's unbelievably intricate. Imagine trying to figure out the average price change for, say, all cheese sold in the entire U.S.
All cheese. Okay, yeah, that sounds hard.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, they use this process called initiation. They randomly sample items, but proportionally. So like an 8-ounce block of cheddar is 7 times more likely to get picked than a 6-ounce fancy goat cheese
Yeah.
because cheddar is more popular.
Based on buying habits.
Exactly. And they do this for thousands and thousands of items. Gluten-free bread, vegan bacon.
Dog grooming, hunting knives.
Yep, all in there. They try to capture what people are actually buying. And the biggest chunk, shelter, that's over 1/3 of the index.
Housing costs.
Right. And they calculate it using something called owner's equivalent rent.
Which means?
Basically, they estimate what a homeowner would have to pay to rent their own house. So even if you own your home free and clear, your housing cost in the CPI could still go up if rents are rising.
Huh. That seems counterintuitive for homeowners.
It does, but they see it as the most consistent way to measure the cost of shelter across renters and owners in a changing market. And this number, the CPI, it's always been controversial.
Yeah.
Always. The very first cost of living index back in 1921 had things like straw boaters in it.
Straw boaters. Times chain.
Definitely. So over the years, they've introduced different versions. There's the CPI-U for urban consumers, the chain CPI, which tries to account for people switching products when prices change.
Like buying chicken instead of beef if beef gets expensive.
Exactly. Trying to adapt to real consumer behavior.
But what really strikes me is how paradoxical it is. The CPI rarely feels like your specific experience, right?
Almost never.
Like, poor households often feel inflation much worse because food and gas things economists sometimes call volatile or non-core.
Yeah, they strict them out for core inflation.
Well, those are absolutely central, non-negotiable costs for low-income families. And we know inflation can destabilize things badly. Weimar Germany, Argentina, even U.S. presidents resorting to wage and price controls.
High inflation makes people anxious, societies a little crazy, as the source says.
But for a lot of us, anyone younger than maybe 50, significant inflation was kind of forgotten history.
Until recently.
Which brings up this current puzzle, the vibe session.
Right. The economy looks strong on paper, unemployment's low, inflation rates have fallen dramatically, like from over 9% down to under 3%.
Huge drop.
And yet, most Americans feel like the economy's bad and inflation is still raging. Why? The disconnect. Well, part of it is just misunderstanding. Falling inflation doesn't mean prices are dropping, just rising slower. Prices are still higher than they were.
Okay, that's one piece.
But a huge piece, according to the sources, is food inflation. Groceries. Food at home is up something like 28% in 5 years.
Wow, 28%.
Yeah, they hit you every single week, maybe every day. It punches you in the face, as one quote puts it. And that personal, painful experience just overrides the abstract data about the overall inflation rate slowing down.
Your grocery bill feels more real than the BLS report.
So the CPI is kind of this impossible number. Society needs it to function, so it has to be calculated.
Even though it can't perfectly capture everyone's reality.
Exactly. It demands objectivity, even when perfect objectivity is maybe unattainable.
Yeah.
It makes you think of that Carl Sagan quote.
Which one?
His dark vision about America potentially losing the ability to tell the difference between what feels good and what's actually true. That feels worryingly relevant sometimes.
Okay, let's shift gears again to a government agency that, well, let's just say it doesn't win many popularity contests.
Uh-oh. I think I know where this is going.
The IRS, Specifically, their Criminal Investigation Unit, IRS-CI.
Right. Often misunderstood, sometimes outright vilified.
We meet Jared Koopman. He runs their cybercrime division. And get this, Koopman's a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Okay, that's unexpected for an IRS guy.
And he actually sees a parallel between his job and jiu-jitsu. It's about technique, leverage, enabling a smaller entity to take down a much bigger opponent.
Following the money, finding the weak points.
Exactly. And his team's results are kind of staggering. They've rescued kids, seized massive amounts of child abuse material, arrested hundreds of pedophiles.
Serious crimes far beyond just tax evasion.
Oh, yeah. They executed the biggest crypto seizure ever from terrorist groups like Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. They were key in putting the CEO of Binance, the huge crypto exchange, in prison.
Wow. So they're major players in complex financial crime.
Major. They've recovered over $12 billion for victims in the U.S. Treasury.
And yet, the public perception of the IRS is just toxic, isn't it? Even the commissioner admits they're iconically unpopular.
Totally. They face budget cuts, political attacks, accusations of being armed robbers, fights over how many bullets their agents can buy.
Which must be incredibly demoralizing for people doing this vital work.
You'd think so. But Koopman, who, by the way, has never fired his gun on the job, he's just completely mission-driven, comes from a family with a history of military and police service. It's ingrained. And the crypto thing, he got into it early. A colleague heard about Bitcoin on, of all places, Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yep.
And Koopman immediately saw it. The next challenge, a new potential for fraud.
He saw the criminal possibilities.
Right. Bitcoin started with these sort of idealistic, decentralized goals, but criminals jumped on it fast.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, IRS-CI often finds that crucial piece of evidence that cracks big cases involving multiple agencies. It's like Al Capone.
Everyone thinks Elliot Ness got him right. The
Yeah.
Untouchables.
Right. But the real hero, the guy who actually put Capone away for tax evasion, was an IRS agent named Michael Malone.
Following the money.
Always follow the money. Koopman's team does the modern version. Staring at screens, tracing blockchain transactions, looking for those tiny digital scars criminals inevitably leave behind.
Unmasking people hiding behind anonymity. The sources give some great examples, like Gary Alford, an IRS agent. He's the one who identified Dread Pirate Roberts, the guy running the Silk Road dark web marketplace.
Ross Ulbricht, how'd he do it?
By meticulously tracing Ulbricht's earliest online posts and mistakes from before Silk Road even existed, connected the dots.
Wow. Digital archaeology. Led to Ulbricht getting 2 life sentences, billions in Bitcoin seized.
And another Koopman agent, Tigran Gambarian, uncovered dirty cops, a DEA agent and a Secret Service agent, who were stealing Bitcoin from the Silk Road investigation itself.
Seriously. Inside job.
Yeah, busted by a single message they forgot to encrypt. One mistake. But the case Koopman calls their most consequential was Welcome to Video.
How was that?
Just a horrific child sexual abuse website hosted on the dark web. Vile stuff.
Oh, God.
His team found the server's physical location because the site admin made one tiny mistake. A right-click on the homepage that left a clue in the source code.
One right click led them to the server.
Yep. Led to kids being rescued, hundreds of arrests worldwide. And then the Binance investigation really tested on this massive crypto exchange that kind of existed everywhere but nowhere.
Hard to pin down jurisdictionally.
Exactly. Took incredible computer science skills plus old-fashioned search warrants to unravel their money laundering and sanctions evasion.
So it makes you wonder again, why don't we hear more about this, given the successes, the massive return on investment?
Right. These agents could make 3-4 times more money working for crypto companies or cybersecurity firms.
But they stay. Why, as Koopman says, it's about the mission.
That mission thing again?
Yeah. The IRS commissioner calls them a nerdy SEAL Team 6. And he sounds genuinely frustrated by the false narrative surrounding their work.
So why stay quiet?
Koopman has a practical take. Sometimes it's beneficial to fly under the radar.
So the criminals don't see them coming.
Exactly. Let them underestimate the nerds.
All right, next up. The National Archives. NARA, where the country keeps its memories.
The repository of our history.
And here's where it gets really interesting. How public servants there are working to basically democratize that history, make it accessible to absolutely everyone. We meet Pamela Wright. She's NARA's Chief Innovation Officer.
Chief Innovation Officer at the Archives. Cool title.
Isn't it? And her background is fascinating. Grew up on a ranch in Montana, party line telephone, missile silos nearby. Talk about contrasts.
Wow, yeah. from rural Montana to D.C. archivists.
Her mission now, get the archives records online, all 13 billion of them.
13 billion. That's astronomical.
The goal is to essentially fit the entire National Archives onto the phone in your pocket, make it available anywhere, anytime.
And what's powerful about that, she argues, is how it makes narrow, and by extension the country, more democratic and more fair. It shrinks that distance, physical and psychological, between regular citizens out in the hinterlands, as the source says, and the centers of power in D.C.
Brings history closer.
Exactly. She gets the romanticism of seeing the actual Declaration of Independence or the Louisiana Purchase Treaty with its gold leaf.
Or Lincoln's Homestead Act papers. Her own grandfather used that act.
Right. She understands that feeling. But she argues digital access is crucial. Like having friends on your phone, they're still real friends, but now they're always accessible. History should be like that too.
So she's big on this open government initiative, transparency, collaboration. Back in 2011, she started the Citizen Archivist program.
Citizen Archivist, what's that?
It completely flipped the script. Instead of archivists being these, quote, priesthood of persnickety crypt keepers,
Love that description.
they invited the public, volunteers, to help transcribe millions of old, faded, handwritten documents. Stuff that's hard for computers to read.
Crowdsourcing history.
Totally. Their recruiting slogan is brilliant. Is reading cursive your superpower?
That's great. Tapping into hidden skills. And this connects to the bigger picture through partnerships Neri fosters, like digitreaties.org.
Tell me about that.
It's a website built with input from Native American tribes, giving easy access to all 374 ratified Indian treaties.
Wow, that's incredibly important.
Hugely important. It lets tribal elders, researchers, anyone find their ancestors' names on documents like, say, the 1835 Treaty of New Dakota.
The treaty that led to the Trail of Tears for the Cherokee? Including some of my own ancestors, actually.
Exactly. Having direct, easy access to these profoundly important, often painful, historical documents is vital for understanding and reconciliation.
And Wright's rural background, that ranch upbringing, it gave her this deep sense of stewardship of resources that belong to the American people.
Not just guarding them, but sharing them responsibly.
Right. And for her, innovation isn't always about shiny new tech. Often it's about figuring out how to use what you have to accomplish something that's never been done before. Resourcefulness. And the archives themselves, they hold everything, right? Good and bad, the full Nixon, the awful stuff on the tapes, but also the records of him signing the Clean Air Act.
Reflecting the complexity of history, NRA has to be impartial. And they have this online platform, History Hub.
What's that do?
Anyone, literally anyone, can ask a historical question related to the archive's records.
And who answers?
NRA archivists, but also knowledgeable citizen volunteers. You get these courteous, informed, nonpartisan answers. It's described as a place where knowledge is pleasure.
Democratizing expertise, too. Pamela Wright also led the team that got the 1950 census released online right at midnight when it became legally available in 2022.
I remember the excitement around that. Genealogists were thrilled.
And it was the first time NRA used AI significantly for digital access to help read the handwriting.
Using tech to unlock the past.
The goal, she said, was to allow everyone to see themselves in the country, finding not just famous names like Louis Armstrong or Georgia O'Keeffe, but your own family. She found her own parents in there.
That personal connection to history, powerful stuff.
Okay, let's unpack this next one. We're going to meet someone representing the next generation of public servants, Olivia Reinberg going.
Okay.
She's a paralegal at the Department of Justice in the Antitrust Division.
And this really tackles that misconception head on, doesn't it? The whole deep state idea.
Totally.
These are young people specifically choosing government work because they want to make Americans' lives better. It's not some shadowy conspiracy. It's often quite idealistic.
Now, Olivia is actually my goddaughter.
Oh, wow. Personal connection.
Yeah. And her family, initially, there was some, small contention about her going to the DOJ. They saw it as, well, not the cops, but not the cops.
Understandable caution, maybe.
Right. She first thought about the Civil Rights Division, but then she found antitrust. And she saw it as this powerful way to change the world, make America more equitable.
And her personal story really informs that passion.
Yeah.
It's deeply interwoven with politics and identity.
Tell us about that.
She's Black, adopted by two white lesbian mothers. Grew up in Portland, Maine, where she was kind of a micro-celebrity because her family was so unusual there at the time.
Right.
So they moved to Oakland, California, specifically seeking a community that looked more like her. where she wouldn't stand out quite so much.
A conscious choice for identity affirmation.
Exactly. She learned early on that adoption shouldn't be colorblind, that race and identity matter profoundly. And she got politically active, super young phone banking for marriage equality.
Yeah.
And she was just 8 years old.
8. Wow.
Yeah. She vividly remembers that fight, the anxiety, and then the huge relief when marriage equality became law in 2015. Then 2016, Trump's election. That really cemented her desire to be in D.C., to be part of the policy world.
So D.C. felt like the place to be.
Absolutely. She loves the energy, the nerds about politics, as she says. And she specifically mentioned loving how Black D.C. is, seeing so many successful Black professionals in positions of influence. That visible representation mattered. She calls D.C. this unique factory of the federal government that ain't going nowhere.
That's a great line. So, okay, antitrust. What is it, basically? Olivia breaks it down really simply.
Yeah.
It's the system of laws we have to protect competition, to stop monopolies from forming where one company gets so big it can just charge you whatever you want.
Keeping markets fair for consumers.
Right. And for Olivia, it connects to fairness more broadly. Her line is, the American dream shouldn't impede on other people's American dream. A monopoly achieving its dream can crush others.
And Kathy O'Neill, who's an expert antitrust lawyer featured in the source,
Okay.
she links it directly to the whole American ethos of meritocracy, competition being good. Competition drives lower prices, better quality, innovation.
Apes companies on their toes.
Exactly. The classic success story everyone points to is the breakup of AT&T back in the early 80s.
Ma Bell.
Ma Bell.
Yeah.
It was this huge, radical decision at the time. But look what happened. Phone service went from limited choices and crazy expensive long-distance calls
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Guarding the phone.
to prices plummeting and this explosion of new tech like wireless service that might never have happened under the old monopoly.
And the DOJ is active now, right? Cases against Big Tech, Live Nation, Ticketmaster, Amazon.
Very active.
Yeah.
A renewed focus on antitrust enforcement.
And then there's this case that's really fascinating and maybe speaks to that equity piece Olivia cares about, the class action lawsuit against the UFC.
The Mixed Martial Arts Organization.
Yeah. So Luke Thomas, who's a combat sports analyst, he lays it out. The UFC makes something like 90 cents of every dollar in the entire MMA and boxing world combined.
Dominant.
Total dominance. But they only pay their fighters about 20% of the revenue.
20%. That seems
Yeah.
low.
It is. Compared to other major sports leagues like the NFL or NBA, where players get closer to 50%.
Huge difference.
And the judge in this class action case, Judge Richard Boulware, he's twice rejected settlement offers. He seems to believe the UFC is operating as an illegal monopoly with predatory practices.
So the judge is pushing back hard.
Yeah. Which raises a really interesting question the source explores. Why do so many UFC fighters seem okay with this pay structure, even when it seems objectively against their best interests?
That is puzzling.
Yeah.
Loyalty, fear,
Oh.
lack of collective bargaining power. And this all connects back to Max Stier. He's the president of the Partnership for Public Service, the group behind the Sammys Awards we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
The source calls him the Mr. Rogers of government, a real optimist,
Yeah.
a true believer in government as our one tool for collective action.
A needed voice, probably.
And get this, he actually started the DOJ's antitrust paralegal program back in 1993.
No way. So Olivia is in the program he created.
Exactly. So he's especially invested in her success and in attracting more young people like her. He emphasizes how urgent it is. Only 7% of the entire federal workforce is under 30.
7%. That's really low. A generation gap.
A huge one. They desperately need that new generation in public service.
So the source puts a very direct, very politically charged question to them. What if a presidential candidate said, day one, they'd fire 50,000 federal employees?
Wow. That's pointed. How did they respond?
Olivia, Kathy the lawyer, Luke the analyst, Max Stier unanimous. Terrible idea.
Across the board.
Yep. They argued it would cripple essential government functions, hurt consumers, undermine everything we've been talking about. Max Stier, Mr. Nonpartisan usually, even said he'd have to go partisan in opposing that.
Strong reaction. Shows how fundamental they see this work.
But then there's Olivia's personal reality check. Her own challenge.
What's that?
Student loans. To become a lawyer, she's looking at maybe $400,000 in debt.
Oof. That's a mountain.
And she calls the student loan system fundamentally flawed. It makes it incredibly hard for someone like her, someone passionate about public service, to actually choose it over a much higher paying private sector job that could help pay off that debt.
The math is just brutal. And that really hits home, right? If the system, the financial reality, makes it almost impossible for people like Olivia, people who are practically purpose-built, to serve the public interest if it pushes them away.
Then the system itself is failing.
Exactly. The system is wrong. We need more Olivias in government tackling these complex problems. How do we make that possible?
Okay, our final story, this one. It's truly heartbreaking, but also hopeful. It shows the critical, sometimes invisible work of one public servant, but also reveals a really profound systemic failure.
Okay, bracing myself.
It's about how this all translates to literally saving lives. We start with Elena Smith, 5 years old, diagnosed with something called Balamuthia mandrillaris.
Balamuthia. Never heard of it.
Almost nobody has. It's a brain-eating amoeba. Extremely rare, fewer than 200 cases ever reported worldwide. And it's incredibly deadly, like 95% fatal.
Oh my God. Brain-eating amoeba. That's terrifying.
Horrifying. The story recounts her family's ordeal. Initial misdiagnosis, then the treatments they tried had agonizing side effects. She was even self-harming because of the pain and confusion.
Oh, that poor child. And her parents.
Just unimaginable stress. Repeated MRIs showed her brain looking, quote, like a bomb had gone off. Doctors eventually suggested end-of-life care.
Giving up hope.
Their marriage was falling apart under the strain, but then the shared enemy, trying to save their daughter, somehow united them.
So against that terrible backdrop, we meet Heather Stone.
Who is she?
A public servant at the FDA. Her job, her specific role, is to help doctors find new treatments for rare, deadly diseases like Balamuthia.
A crucial role, clearly.
But she was buried deep in the organization chart, like 6 layers down. The FDA was even hesitant about letting her talk to the writer, preferring a higher-up, a politically appointed boss.
Bureaucracy even there. And Heather's own story is pretty remarkable, too. Her dad was an infectious disease doctor, so she grew up around medicine.
So it's in the family.
Yeah. But she herself developed this series of chronic illnesses, PANDAS, which is a pediatric autoimmune disorder linked to strep fibromyalgia. She lost her singing voice. She had a 3-octave range.
Wow. So she faced her own medical mysteries.
Totally. She learned firsthand to skip the horses and think zebras, look for the rare diagnosis. Medical school became physically impossible for her.
So she couldn't become a doctor herself.
Right. So she decided to dedicate her career to finding new treatments from within the government inside the FDA.
And this raises that critical question again. Why won't the free market solve problems like Balamuthia?
Too rare, right? Not enough patients.
Exactly. There's just no financial incentive for a drug company to invest millions developing a drug for maybe a handful of cases a year. You can't do the usual clinical trials, the randomized control trials, with so few patients.
The standard methods don't work. So Heather's mission, which came out of a chat with a doctor from the Gates Foundation, Leonard Sachs, was to build a system called CREID.
CREID.
Yeah. Basically a database, a platform where doctors anywhere in the world could report cases of rare diseases and, crucially, report what treatments they tried, whether they worked or not.
Collecting real-world data, even if it's anecdotal.
Precisely. The whole idea was to gather these anecdotes, the kind of stuff medical journals often dismiss as just stories, not science. Because for these super rare diseases, Heather argued, some data is better than no data.
Makes perfect sense when the alternative is nothing. But she faced huge pushback inside the FDA.
Why?
Critics said it wasn't evidence-based medicine. It wasn't rigorous enough. Some argued it wasn't even a U.S. problem, since many rare diseases are more common in tropical countries.
Bureaucratic hurdles again.
Big time. They gave her zero marketing budget for CureREID. Doctors were just too busy to input cases. After 5 years, only 200 cases have been reported in total.
So it's not many.
Pathetic. Heather and her tiny team basically had to find and enter cases themselves. She even asked her own mom to dig up old case files from a research trip to Peru years ago.
Wow, whatever it takes.
And Balamuthia. That was the very first clinical case ever entered into CREID.
Okay, meanwhile, totally separately, over at UCSF, a researcher named Joe DeRisi discovered a potential treatment for Balamuthia, an existing drug called nitroxaline.
He found something that might work.
Yeah, in lab tests. He published a paper about it in 2018, but he figured, okay, his job was done. He knew, quote, it doesn't really pay anyone to do it, meaning to actually get that knowledge out there to doctors who might need it.
The gap between discovery and application.
Exactly. DeRisi actually described Heather Stone at the FDA as fighting a solo battle, trying to bridge that gap. So here's where the story gets both incredible and incredibly painful. Elena Smith's recovery.
Did she get the nitroxaline?
It felt like a miracle. Her grandmother, desperately searching online, stumbled across Derisi's preprint paper before it was even formally published.
The grandmother found it. Wow.
Then Elena's mom, Amanda, she creates a LinkedIn profile. Under experience, she literally puts mother trying to save her daughter.
Oh my God. That's powerful desperation.
Uses LinkedIn to connect with Derisi and his colleagues. The family, completely desperate, doctors giving up. They end up getting the nitroxaline themselves and giving it to Elena.
They administered it themselves.
Yes, and
Yeah.
she made a full recovery.
Yeah.
Complete.
A true miracle. But here's the gut punch, right? Connecting it to the bigger picture. That miracle highlights a massive system failure. Heather Stone's tool, CURE-ID, the very thing designed for this situation, it played zero role in saving Elena. The Smiths found the answer through sheer luck and desperate searching.
The system didn't work.
It didn't. And even worse, the source reveals that around the same time, another little girl, just 4 years old, living only an hour away from Derisi's lab at UCSF.
Oh, no.
She died from balamuthia. Her doctors found out about the nitroxaline possibility too late.
Oh, that's just devastating. The cure was right there.
Right there. It's like the quote says, society had been handed a mechanism for saving itself, but had a built-in rule against using the mechanism. The knowledge existed, the tool to share it existed, but the connection wasn't made in time.
Just incredible. The Smiths, their marriage was saved, ironically, by fighting this terrible common enemy. Her dad, Walter, went from being an atheist to striving to be, in his words, the greatest man for his wife.
Profound transformation through trauma.
Their story is filled with gratitude now, but it's also this stark reminder, isn't it, of all the other kids, the other patients whose parents weren't there or weren't able to navigate the system or just didn't get lucky finding that one obscure paper online.
The ones who fall through the cracks.
So, wrapping this all up, this deep dive, it makes it so clear, doesn't it? The federal government isn't some faceless blob.
Not at all.
It's powered by real people. Christopher Mark, Vanessa Bailey, Pamela Wright, Jared Koopman, Olivia Reimberg-Going, Heather Stone. Incredibly diverse individuals.
All committed to these missions.
Yes, sir. Yeah, missions that deeply affect our lives, our safety, our understanding of the universe, our economy. Often without any fanfare, sometimes completely unknown.
And the common thread, it seems to me, is that quiet dedication, that mission focus. Overcoming huge challenges, lack of funding, bureaucracy, public misunderstanding, sometimes even hostility.
Right. From mine shafts to outer space, from economic data to cybercrime, from historical archives to fighting for justice and cures.
These are the people tackling some of our biggest, most complicated problems. Often the problems the private sector can't or won't solve.
So what's the takeaway for you listening to this? Maybe next time you hear someone just paint government workers with one broad negative brush. Or maybe you're frustrated dealing with some agency.
Which happens, let's be honest.
It does. But maybe remember these stories. Remember there are countless people inside working incredibly hard, often against the odds, trying to make things better.
And maybe the bigger thought is, how do we measure ourselves as a society? Is it just by the problems we solve? Or is it also by whether we empower these unsung heroes, these dedicated people, to actually do the solving?
And do we listen when they find a solution? Like with CURE-ID?
Exactly. And that question about the next generation. What if the Olivias, the bright, passionate young people we need, what if they just can't afford to choose public service anymore? What happens then?
Our society has been handed mechanisms for saving itself, as that quote said. Tools, knowledge, dedicated people. The challenge really is, will we use them? Will we support them? If any of these stories resonated, or if you know a federal employee doing amazing work, the Partnership for Public Service wants to hear about it. You can email them at yourstories@ourpublicservice.org.
And you can learn more or support their work at ourpublicservice.org. They're nonpartisan, nonprofit, just focused on making government work better.
A fitting end, recognizing the unrecognized.